Hey everyone, Justin Jolene here with another issue of the Running Specialist Report. And today we're going to be talking about some of the latest research in running medicine. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the top 5 most common running styles. We'll also be talking about changes to running gait after childbirth in women with stress urinary incontinence. And then lastly, we'll be talking about some new interesting return to run criteria and return to run programs for shin splints. So let's get into this interesting content. And first, let's talk about the top 5 most common running styles. So a gait analysis for many PTs is going to be made up of a lot of individual findings from a running gait analysis. This would include things like foot strike, terminal hip extension, vertical oscillation, and we use those things to be able to make a clinical decision. Now, the problem is that many practitioners miss gait analysis findings most impactful to running economy and injury prevention. And therefore, some new research is pointing clinicians to classify runners into 5 common running styles. So let me tell you about these 5 common running styles. They include bounce, stick, hop, push, and sit running. And these are basically ways that we can easily identify distinguishable movement patterns. And it's a good way to be able to distinguish runners that run with a specific style, because then we can calculate that and put that into our clinical decision making and help improve their outcomes. So each of these styles is based off a runner's step frequency, step length, stance time, flight time, and vertical displacement. And really, we should have a formative understanding of what these gait parameters are and their definitions. So I want to go through and quickly give you a review of what they are. The step frequency is going to be the total number of running steps per minute. The step length is the distance from the right foot step to the left foot step. Stance time is going to be the amount of time the foot is on the ground during each step. Flight time is going to be the time spent in the air from push-off to initial contact of one foot. And vertical displacement or oscillation is going to be the amount of up and down movement a runner has during each stride. So how do we analyze this? And it kind of sounds daunting. How do we take all these measurements? Don't worry, I have some good new research for you in a way to be able to do this efficiently. So a slow motion running gait analysis is not the only method to be able to analyze these running styles. And the interesting thing is that research continues to support the use of commercially available products like running watches, and these are really some reliable ways we can collect data. The great thing is that Garmin's and running watches give clinicians valuable insight on running metrics. And it doesn't only give you one run, it gives you multiple runs if applicable with that runner. So many runners are using running watches, and really clinicians should capitalize on this plethora of data to be able to categorize runners into different running styles. Now, if you want to learn more about applying and interpreting the running data, check Runner Resources. You'll have to log in to do this, but you'll be able to find the explanations of average values and common running metrics for quick references while you're in the clinic. Now, to better understand each of these common running styles, let's take a look at this infographic. So this infographic is a really, really interesting chart or diagram because it's going to help understand where each of these running styles are going to land based on some of these metrics we already talked about. So again, step frequency, step length, stance time, flight time, vertical displacement. So a couple important things here. Let's start with sit running. So sit running is going to be a moderate amount of bounce or stance. It's going to be a smaller amount of flight, but what we can see is it's right in the middle here. So I want to orient you on the very top part. We can see longer flight, that's like bounce, and then we can see on the bottom part it's going to be a longer stance, that'd be like stick. So for sit, you have a moderate amount of flight and a moderate amount of stance. You also have a fairly moderate cadence. However, you notice that these runners are quite upright while they're running. You'll also notice they have increased knee flexion as well. I'll go into more detail about what that means. But let's quickly identify push running too. This is going to be a lower cadence, longer strides, but they're also going to have a forward lean while they run as well. Hop is going to be on the other end of the spectrum. You're going to have a higher cadence, smaller strides. However, you're also going to have a moderate amount of flight or a moderate amount of contact with the ground. Then we have bounce. Bounce, as you can see, has a long flight time, a lot of vertical up and down motion. However, we can also see that it has a moderate amount of cadence. It doesn't have a really big or small step. And then lastly, we have stick running. And this is going to be a very minimal amount of up and down motion. However, we can see it's going to have a much longer ground contact time and stance time. So let's talk about these in a little more detail. So bounce running is going to be characterized by high vertical displacement. We're also going to have high amounts of hip extension, and as we mentioned before, a medium cadence. Now, runners really should rely on the stretch shortening cycle for this, and that's what most of them do because they spring up and down when they run, and they go up and down into the stride, really capitalizing on being able to fire those muscles. And that leads us to our next point. Clinicians should know that this running style is not energy efficient, but it can generate high propulsive forces. This also has a lot of impact on their runners, so be careful. Let's move on to stick running. So stick running is going to be characterized by long stance times, as we mentioned before. These are very stiff legs. Now, this is using minimal stored energy. So unlike bounce, it's on the other spectrum, we're not going to be going up and down to the stride a lot. There's not going to be a lot of vertical displacement. However, this is going to reduce impact forces. Lastly, running economy is going to suffer. This is because you're not optimizing the use of the muscles, and you're not going to be actually able to recruit the propulsive forces of these muscles because you're not really getting through the whole stride. So then we go to sit running. And sit running is going to be characterized by a vertical upright torso, so a nice upright posture. However, it's going to also have a lot of sustained knee flexion throughout the gait cycle. Now, these runners are going to have a medium step length and vertical oscillation. However, this style is quad heavy. We are going to see runners with strong quads doing this, but oftentimes it's because of weak gluteal musculature. And these are going to risk for overstriding and injuries like patellofemoral pain syndrome because you're putting so much pressure on the knee. Going on to hop running, that's going to be characterized by a high cadence. Now, hop running is your classic style where you're going to see a lot of runners think this is efficient because it's relatively short strides, not a lot of vertical displacement, moderate amounts, but not a lot, but it is a very high cadence. And some people that use this will even use the phrase, oh, I am going to be falling forward when I run. And there's a lot of cueing that can go around that. But while runners might identify this as being efficient, unfortunately, the low stride length is going to decrease the propulsive forces and decrease the power generation. So not efficient in the long run. Then lastly, push running is going to be characterized by long strides, and it's going to have low to moderate vertical displacement, but a lot of forward trunkling. Now, this is going to optimize all that muscle generation to push off, and this can be a really good way to generate a lot of force. However, runners are not capitalizing on the elastic energy storage, so they're not going to really have a lot of up and down motion with vertical displacement, but it's also going to limit their running economy. They're also going to have a lot of forward trunk lean, and that's going to have a lot of hip flexion as well. This is going to increase pressure on the lumbar extensors, and it's also going to increase pressure and stress on the hamstrings. Also, these runners have a high risk to overstride. So as you can see within all these running styles, there's things that we could change and adjust. It's identifying these runners so you can see them on a running gait analysis or through their running data to be able to then help them improve and become more efficient when they run, better running economy, and lastly, reduce the risk of injury.